a great day for it, isn't it?
Perfect.
Water's at a great height too, lovely.
Having dropped a bit from yesterday, it's looking a lot better.
Nice colour to it as well.
I've actually seen a couple of fish moving down.
Have you?
Well, yeah. So it's looking good.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be too long before you contact something.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. Persevere, persevere. Well, look at this, eh? Everything we need for a great day's fishing. The weather, the people, the gear, the river, and of course, the fish. But there's a problem in most rivers on both sides of the Atlantic because there aren't as many fish around as there used to be. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why, but the bottom line is that whether you're into salmon for sport or business, you can't do it without the fish. And we've got to do everything we can to conserve stocks and build them back up. But that sounds like the job for some government agency or scientists. Most of us who fish rivers know that in many of them, the fish are under threat. But what can we do about it? What sort of impact can we have? That's what we're going to be looking at. Well, this is me in my element, fishing for salmon. It's relaxing, exciting, and just about everything else between the two. I mean, just being in a place like this is an absolute privilege. But, of course, the real joy is in catching the fish. Now, many anglers say a fish is a bonus, but don't forget, they wouldn't be here if they didn't actually want to catch a fish. All right, the place is fine, the weather's good. But we're here for one reason: to catch fish. To feel them take the lure, feel their power up through the line. That great moment when you know that you've got one. You've outwitted it for a change. You want to bring it in, see it, know that you've made the catch. But think about that. If that's where the pleasure is, if that's really what it's all about, why do we need to kill the fish? It's nice to keep the occasional one for the pot if there are loads in the river, but if fish are scarce, why not just release it after it's been caught? That would help preserve stocks, and it wouldn't spoil our sport. It's happening all over the country. More and more anglers are being encouraged to return fish, especially spring fish. Because if you catch and release a fish in the proper way, it'll still be able to spawn. And the bigger the fish, the better. Some fish stocks, like spring salmon, are seriously short of spawners. And we've really got to ask why. Many anglers blame it on nets, seals or sea lice, but the scientific view is that more young salmon are dying at sea because of changes in the ocean climate. With fewer salmon surviving, all fishermen, whether netsmen or anglers, in Greenland or in home waters, need to reduce their catches if sufficient salmon are going to reach the spawning grounds. Now, 90% of spring salmon caught are taken by anglers. That's right, you and me. So to keep the sport alive and healthy for us and for future generations of anglers, it's only fair that we do our bit for conservation. The Canadians and Americans have been doing it successfully for years. And of course, anything they can do.
Stocks of spring salmon are at crisis levels in many rivers, and if, as anglers, we're interested in helping conserve this wonderful fish, we have to play our part. By adopting catch and release, we can experience the thrill of catching these fish and the pleasure of putting them back to go on and spawn. The alternative, which is a ban on rod and line angling at certain times of the year, would have a devastating effect on small businesses and the rural communities that they support. That is why the Salmon and Trout Association supports the concept of catch and release for spring salmon.
But of course, there is a right and a wrong way of doing it. It's not just a question of saying, okay, that's it caught, now I'll let it go. If you want the fish to survive, you've got to be prepared. Get the right equipment for a start, and learn the proper catch and release technique. Do it right, and your fish will have a much better chance of surviving and spawning. So let's start with the equipment. First of all, what you need is your big landing net. Keep it with you at all times, and it should have small, soft mesh with no knots. These are quite readily available nowadays and cause far less damage to the fish than the traditional knotted net. In fact, since April 1998, bylaws in England and Wales prohibit the use of knotted mesh landing nets, because the idea is to minimize handling. In fact, in some places, you may be able to do without a net altogether, but whether you use one or not, always try to keep the fish in the water while you unhook it. And as for a gaff or a tailor, no. Also, always try and make sure the line you choose is strong enough to let you land your catch quickly. Use a minimum of 12-pound breaking strain, or 15 and even more when the river's high, because the quicker you bring the fish in, the less exhausted it'll be, and it will recover more quickly when you release it. And try and use barbless hooks, also smaller and fewer hooks. You can get this out of a fish's mouth quite easily, and it will obviously cause less damage than this. Now, it probably won't be easy to find barbless hooks, so if you haven't got any, just get your pliers and flatten the barbs on the ones that you have got, like so. There we are, barbless. And it's a good idea too to have forceps or some other tool to take the hook out of the fish's mouth. Now, this business of bringing the fish in quickly, it's obvious why it's important. The longer a fish is played, the more exhausted it'll become. But don't try to drag the fish in too quickly, or it'll be too lively to unhook easily. Just play the fish firmly and keep it in the water. When you take a fish out of water, its gills don't work very well. This means the fish can't take in enough oxygen. And if it's a fish that's nearly exhausted because it's been played for a while, well, that makes everything worse. It's like us holding our breath underwater. We can probably do that for a minute or so, no problem. But try running a 5-minute mile and then holding your breath. Different story, isn't it? Same for the fish. It needs more oxygen to recover, but taking it out of the water means it's actually getting less. Because the longer you keep it out of the water, the less chance it has of surviving. Of course, the idea of catch and release isn't new. Lots of anglers are already doing it voluntarily. The problem of dwindling stocks is so serious in some parts of the UK, though, that anglers may soon be legally obliged to use the catch and release technique for larger salmon. Now, the producer's idea is that I demonstrate the proper release technique, so obviously I've got to catch a fish first. And this may take a while. Fishy water, fishy looking water. And fishy looking customers. There's been quite a bit of rain recently, so the river's a little higher than normal. So consequently, what I'm fishing with here is a sinking line to try and get the fly down to the fish. I've got 15-pound nylon breaking strain on. And the fly that I've got, it's just a little Waddington style fly, black and yellow. Sort of traditional autumn fly. Don't want to wade in too deep because, as I say, the fish could be lying quite close in and you don't want to spook them. Oh, there's a fish, there's a fish. Yep. That was a gentle take, a very gentle take. Lovely. Perfect. I don't think it's a very big fish, but it's a fish nonetheless. I think this is my idea of heaven, actually, standing in a river like this, playing a salmon, sun shining, Taking line, a bit of line. Now, there's a little backwater downstream a bit, so I'll try and lead the fish down there to land it. Whoa! Took a bit of line there. Let's try and make for the shore. Now, we've already mentioned the first rule. We try and play the fish quickly, keep it in the water, and obviously it's the fight to land the fish that's the exciting part. It's really enjoyable, so although you've got to be firm, you can be gentle too. There we are. Oh, it's a nice little fish. Nice little fish. All right. Let's see if I can get out of the water here. Myself organised with the net. There we go. Is that ready? Now it's time really to practice what I'm preaching. I don't want to panic the fish too much, so I'm going to get it into quiet water because they get rather upset if they're brought into water that's too shallow or muddy. I'll try and get him upstream and drop it back into the net if possible. Oh, difficult to see with the sunshine. Yeah, it's not a big fish, but I think it's a nice shiny one. Take some line off here. Whoa, we just about jumped into the net. There we go. Now, keep the fish in the water. Keep him in the water. And we'll bring him up here. Well now, I want to handle the fish as little as possible, so I make sure that my hands are wet and keep the fish in the water, don't beach it. Get the forceps to remove the hook. There we are. Now you can see how much easier it is doing this with a barbless hook. If the fish was deeply hooked, what I would do is cut the line as close to the lure as possible, and I would still release it because they do actually survive. Now before I release it, I'm going to help it to recover a bit, and this is a very important part of the catch and release technique. You keep the fish in the water, support it gently, don't squeeze it, support it upright obviously, facing the current while it recovers, and you keep on supporting it until it's fit enough to swim off on its own. Which this one is just about to do. You don't want to rush this bit because it needs time to recover. There we go. Off it goes. I wasn't going to weigh it because that would have meant taking it out of the water, and you can usually estimate the weight from its length anyway. That one was a lovely little silvery fish, and they're sometimes a little bit more vulnerable, so you have to take a bit more care with them. I would say that fish was probably about 4 or 5 pounds. And if you do want to photograph, you bring the fish just briefly to the surface, get your shot quickly, make a nice smile, and then put the fish back into the water. Well, that's brilliant. If you like, this is angling plus the thrill of the catch and the satisfaction of release. But I sometimes wonder if maybe I'm fooling myself. I mean, will that one actually really survive? As well as making me feel good, is it genuinely going to help to preserve stocks? Well, I needed some sort of reassurance, so I asked John Webb, a man who's caught and released more fish than I've had hot dinners, what the chances of a fish like that survival are.
All the indications are they have an excellent chance of survival, whether they be a spring salmon or an autumn salmon.
Of course, the big question is, how do you know?
Well, we've done quite a lot of work now over the last couple of years, myself and colleagues at the Freshwater Fisheries Laboratory in Pitlochry, where we've tagged fish that have been caught by anglers and released back into rivers like the Dee and the Tay. One type of tag, the radio tag, allows us to follow the fish from the point when we release it all through the season, over the spawning period, and then perhaps even as a kelt later on in the following spring.
And of course, catch and release, it's not a particularly new phenomenon.
It's been practiced on, particularly on salmon, in the USA, Canada, and Iceland and Russia for a number of years. But it's quite a new thing in this country, particularly the release of spring salmon early in the year that would be otherwise takeable. Of course, salmon anglers have released coloured fish at the back end of the season for many years. It's quite a common occurrence. So there's a long tradition of fish being put back.
Salmon angling is more than just a sport. In many parts of the United Kingdom, it's vital to the rural economy. Thousands of people depend directly or indirectly on our salmon fisheries for their livelihoods. It's not just the fish we're looking after, it's people too, and the way of life that goes with the places where salmon thrive. And there he goes. That's brilliant, that. Let's face it, nothing beats salmon fishing. And we've still got some of the best salmon fishing in the world here. So let's do our bit. We must do everything we can to preserve and improve it. So give catch and release a try. It takes nothing away from the pleasure. In fact, it extends it. It's good for you, and it's even better for the future of salmon fishing.